Croeso, this is James, aka JP Harker, coming to you with another video. This is a rare thing, it's a tag video, and it's the I'm so annoyed at Booktube tag, which I saw on Cat's channel, Brews and Reviews. So I've written down some questions and thought I would share my views. So I'll put a link to Cat's video in the description below. Alright, first off, question 1 on I'm so annoyed at Booktube is, do publishers ever do anything you find annoying? Well, that is a broad question, and as somebody who is trying to publish and promote his own books, there's a very real risk of me just going off on a rant about how dreadful the industry is and why my wonderful, wonderful work isn't being recognized, etc., etc. But I'm going to leave that off because it's not going to achieve anything, and I'll just give my one real bugbear, and that is spoilers in the blurb. Now, this has happened to one of the books I released, where a minor twist was revealed to make the thing look intriguing. And so I'm still not quite well, so I am sipping water. And it's not the first time I've seen it. I've seen things like sort of revealing or half revealing who the killer is, and revealing, oh well, I wonder if this will turn into a war, and it quite obviously is going to. So I think blurbs need to be short and sweet. They need to be just enough to nab your attention, but that's it. You know, leave the rest, and let people find out on their own. So that's that one. Connected to that is question 2, which is, have you ever been annoyed by a spoiler? Even someone saying, there's a great twist. I don't mind people saying that a plot is twisty, because most good plots are. There should be. I don't hold with, you must surprise people for the sake of surprising them. But a good plot should have a few things that don't quite come out of nowhere, but are, oh, interesting, where it didn't quite go the way you were thinking. So I don't mind if someone says, oh, there's a twist, because there should be a twist. I don't like it if someone says, you know, this guy is doomed to die, because then you're just marking time. There was a book recently, it was either The Painted Man or I only read 2 of this series. It was The Painted Man and The Desert Spear. Desert Spear was truly ghastly. Do not read it. But I think it was The Painted Man, which was okay. And someone had mentioned something that happened to one of the characters. And I thought, oh, okay, that's a dreadful thing is going to happen to one of these characters. And they hadn't mentioned that it happens at the end. So I spent the entire book waiting for this dreadful thing to happen to them. And then a chapter from the end, it finally does. And I'm like, well, that sort of ruined all of the previous build-up, because I was just marking time waiting for this thing to happen. And it did, and it was awful, and it's one of the things that makes some of these books dreadful and awful, and I'm not going to go on to a rant for those. But that's the last time I remember being really, really aggravated by a spoiler. I don't like them as a rule, few people do, but I'm rarely sort of crushed if I'll rarely sort of say, oh, I won't bother reading it just because I've heard a spoiler about it. That would be my view there. So, number 3. Have you ever been annoyed by something you discovered in a library, a book sale, or a used bookstore? A little note I made there was a little amusement I have whenever I'm in a charity shop, because I have far too many books. This is a tiny sample of the number of books I have cluttering up my house. So I go into charity shops and I look for second-hand paperbacks, and it always amuses me how much Dan Brown is in there, and how many 50 Shades of Grey copies are in there. Because, yes, good books get handed down too, but there was a time in the UK where charity shops said, we can't take any more 50 Shades of Grey. Stop giving it to us, we cannot sell them. And that's a little bit of Schadenfreude, because I don't hold those books in high regard. I can't slag them off properly because I haven't read them, but I know people who have and whose opinion on these things I trust. So that does rather amuse me. And Dan Brown, fair play to him, he writes an engaging plot. When I read Da Vinci Code, I hammered through it because I was carried along by it. It was only when I got to the end that I thought, hang on, none of that made sense. So I have less of an issue with him, but it's still quite funny. Issues I have with it, I do so hate it when you're in a charity shop. Okay, they're volunteers, they don't have much time, but when there's disorder in the books, where you have the fantasy books are next to the cookery books, and the sports personality, contradiction in terms, biographies are next to the sci-fi, that does annoy me. I think it doesn't take much time. It's actually quite a nice thing, organising books. So, when you have a new one come in, just put it in the right place. But there you go, they're volunteers, I can't really slag them off, and it's for charity. But that does irritate me if I'm browsing through, because I can't just look at by section. The thing that annoys me in libraries, and again I have to be careful not to slag off, because I love my local library. They've got a little kids area that the boy loves, and they've got all sorts of activities and things, but it does annoy me when they have sort of book 3 and 7 of a series on the shelf. And if you want book 1, you have to ask for it to be ordered in. And yes, they will order it in, but it's irritating. You can't just go, oh, I shall pick that. Oh no, wait, this is book 3. This is book 9. That does kind of annoy me. Yes, they've got limited space, but have the most recent one and have the first one. It's not a lot to ask. But that's my little bugbear there. This is a nice little tag. I just get to vent. It's wonderful. It's saving me from having to inflict this on friends and family. Alright. Question number 4. When it comes to short story collections, are you annoyed when there's a novella in the middle of the collection? Not really. I can think of 2 examples. In one of the Horus Heresy books, there are lots of novels in the Horus Heresy series, and several books of short stories. And in one of them I read fairly recently, it was a book of short stories with a big novella in the middle of it. Fortunately, the big novella in the middle of it was the best story, so I didn't mind. It's always hit and miss with books of short stories. There's always going to be some that are better than others, and if the big long one is the best of them, then fine, go for it. Similar thing happened with Dream Songs, and I think it's a 2-part. There's Dream Songs 1 and 2, which is a George R.R. Martin anthology. And same thing, he has lots of short stories, some much longer than others, to the point that they're almost novellas. And one of those was The Sand Kings. And much as I love Song of Ice and Fire, I haven't enjoyed much of George's other stuff. I'm going to give it a go at some of them. But thus far, his other stuff hasn't really grabbed me the way Song of Ice and Fire did. But Sand Kings was good. Sand Kings was creepy, as it was meant to be, but well thought out and interesting, and the protagonist wasn't at all likeable, but you still wound up feeling an element of sympathy for him, and that's some good writing, so I enjoyed that. So it's an obvious answer, but if the novella in the middle of the short stories is a really good novella, it doesn't matter. If it's a rubbish novella, well, I would have been annoyed if it was on its own. I'm still going to be annoyed if it's in a collection. So it's just the quality of it is the only thing that matters. I don't mind. They don't all have to be short if I'm reading an anthology. That's that one. Question 5. Deviled edges, beautiful or annoying? Pass. I don't even know what those are. I'm fairly sure I don't own any such things, but if I did, I wouldn't know. So I'm leaving it at that. Question 6. Other people's annotations in a used book or a library book. Annoying, or are you okay with it? Well, first of all, if you're writing things down in a library book, If that's not a crime, it should be, because that's just rude. That's defacing somebody else's property. That's messing up a book for someone you know is going to read it, and multiple people are going to read it. So that's just not on. So yes, that would very much annoy me if I had a library book out and it was full of someone's notes. If it's a second-hand book, fact, yes. Fine. Fiction, no. Bad. I don't know why someone would write annotations in a novel. Use a piece of paper as a bookmark if you need to jot things down. If you're doing a review, like I am, then you need to keep notes. Well, note it on a piece of paper. Don't scribble on the book. That's just sacrilege. But if it's a textbook, if it's a factual book, and someone's writing in the margins, I'll check this fact X, or see page 97 or whatever, then alright, it makes no real difference. I don't tend to do it with my books. Again, I like to keep my notes on paper, on pads, but it's not the end of the world. If you're reading facts and you want to double check those facts or reference something else, it's not the end of the world if you've written it in the text itself. It's just a little odd. So that's that for that. Number 7. If there's a series or a collection of a certain kind of books in print and changes are made, are you okay or are you annoyed by it? Now, depends on what you mean by changes. It does annoy me when a series of covers change. The Sharp books are the best example. They've been going for many, many years, since I think the mid-1980s, and they're still going now. So consistency of covers, you can't really have it. I've been buying Sharp books since the late 1990s, and they weren't first edition ones. So I've got the books from the late 90s to the early 2000s, and then some genius decided we're going to change all the covers, and we're not going to sell these anymore. So that section onwards, they're in different covers. And then from sort of the mid-2010s to now, there's a different set of covers. And what's slightly irritating is, if I ask for one for Christmas or something, somebody might buy it for me from an unusual place, and it'd be an old cover. And none of them... I'm obsessive about a lot of things. I'm not that obsessive about matching covers, but it does grate on me a little bit. So that's the thing. As far as changes in the story itself go, that does get to me. And again, it's understandable. I've done it myself. There are things in Wildcat where I thought, that's something I'll look into later, and as the stories have gone on, it just hasn't developed. It's been sort of abandoned because that wasn't as interesting as I thought it was going to be, and I found something else that is. So I can't cast stones in that particular glass house, but things like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe is very different to the rest of the Narnia books. There's a lot in there that has a different vibe. It was very clearly written first and written in isolation. So it's the book I don't like going back to reread. Other people seem to think it's the best of them. It's the one I skip if I'm feeling in a Narnia mood, because it feels different. It doesn't feel like the same series. It doesn't really work. Did I mention another one? Oh. A small one in the same vein would be Stormfront of the Dresden Files. Kind of the same, has a few things that you think are going to develop, and as the story changes and the author changes, they don't develop, and you think, well, that could have been interesting. And the same thing with Song of Ice and Fire. For all my love of it, it's not without its flaws. It has plenty of them. And in the first book, it makes a big deal of things like the Warden of the West is... Warden of the East for John Arryn. It was a massive big deal about who gets the title, and that's just forgotten. That's no longer relevant. And Catelyn mentions in the first book that there are no weirwood trees south of the Neck, and there definitely are. Or that, I don't know YouTube's attitude language, so illegitimate children are, oh, they're dreadful, they have no future. That's the vibe in book 1. And even by book 2, you have talk of people like Walder Rivers and all the various sands in Dawn, and later on there's Aurane Waters and all sorts of illegitimate children who have important jobs. But John had to think things were hopeless, so it had to be a certain way in book 1. So that doesn't sort of anger me, how dare it happen. It's just a little, But then I grumble a lot in that sort of way. So that's my feeling of it. Covers a little annoying, content a little more annoying. But forgivable, because I do it. I'll now turn over this piece of paper so that I can read the rest of these. So high-tech, it's unbelievable. Question number 8. Do the decisions of characters in a novel annoy you? I have written down 2 books for this. I mean, sometimes a character's decisions annoy me, but it's as part of a also largely rubbish book. So it's just part of a larger rant of how dreadful this is. But there were 2 cases that really highlighted to me in books that could otherwise have been good. They had other flaws, all books have flaws, but there were 2 books, part of a book series, where there was a lot of potential, and it always angers me when potential is wasted in books. And one of the things that spoiled it were character decisions. Now, first of those is, and the worst of those I think, is the first of the Belgariad books, where our young hero is incredibly stupid, except when the plot needs him to suddenly be very insightful and clever. And then he'll be insightful and clever. And then he'll make a really stupid decision. And he'll repeatedly need to have things spelled out for him. And he'll do the stupidest thing possible in any given situation. But we have to believe that he has some merit. So occasionally he'll come up with a flash of insight into the human condition or into the political situation, none of which he understands. So I don't suppose it's poor character decision as much as character inconsistency leading into their decisions. That does annoy me. When characters do things that are not only out of character, but they decide to do something stupid because the plot needs to take them to point A, and the only way to get to point A is by suddenly forgetting all your common sense. That is irritating. And the same thing is true for Quoth in Name of the Wind. We're repeatedly battered over the head with how clever he is, and yet he repeatedly does really, really stupid things. And I think it's the author's effort to try and make him less of a Mary Sue by saying, look, he makes these mistakes, he's impulsive, not knowing that that's what everybody does to desperately give their Mary Sue some kind of flaw. It's like, oh, we need them to have a character flaw so people don't think they're an unbelievable paragon. Oh, we'll make them impatient. That's at best a tiny flaw, and it's largely used as a plot contrivance in order to push them somewhere that character-wise and logistically they wouldn't have gone, because normally they would be too intelligent to do this. But you need them to do it, so make them do something stupid. Again, I will return to the joys of A Song of Ice and Fire. People's decisions in that make sense, and they lead to logical consequences, even if those consequences aren't immediately obvious. And I do like that. That's one of the things that George does very, very well, is everything that Ned Stark and then Robb Stark, everything that they do makes perfect sense, both in terms of character and in terms of, I've thought this through and this seems like the best course of action. It makes perfect sense. And it still all goes horribly wrong. because it wasn't a stupid decision, it was a decision that hadn't taken into account this or this, but that made sense within its context, and that worked. So, see, I'm saying positive things as well, it's not just me ranting on. So that's that anyway. Number 9, are you ever annoyed by how someone organises their books, and what do you find annoying? I cast no stones on that. It's nice when things are in a lovely order. If you've got a series of books and they're in the wrong order, then that's just insane. But otherwise, put things up as you like. I cannot judge. The Bernard Cornwells, they're in the right order. The Gemmels are sort of in the right order, but no one could call this bookshelf tidy, and well, it's probably the tidiest of my bookshelves, so I'm looking at my others. So yeah, not going to throw stones there. Number 10, share something bookish that you find annoying. I won't go too long on this because, this could take a while. Something that does annoy me sometimes is when a film is better than the book, because as a bookish nerd, you almost feel like you're betraying your people by admitting to it. But it is true. Sacrilege though this is, I enjoy the Lord of the Rings films far more than I enjoyed reading the books, because for all their beauty of language and for all their depth and for all their complexity, they weren't that much fun, not compared to the films. And yes, you need to read the books to fully appreciate the films, but the films manage to grab you and keep you going, and they're fun and they're still deep, and they have a light-hearted aspect and a dark aspect, and they're not too grim and they're not too funny. I don't speak of the Hobbit films, which are dreadful, but in the case of the original Lord of the Rings films, they are, in my humble opinion, more enjoyable than the books, even if they're not as deep. And even if they do make their mistakes. And I can't think of many other examples where that's happened, but I have seen it happen. Stardust, that's the other one. Of all the Neil Gaiman books, I'm not a big Neil Gaiman fan, but of all his books, Stardust was the one I liked the best. And the film they made it even better. It took all the best parts of the book, it left out all the slower parts or all the needlessly creepy parts, and it made something that really worked, and I really liked that. And at the same time was slightly annoyed because I love books. How could a film be better than a book? Well, sometimes it is. Second one that I've noted is when a series starts really well and then tails off or isn't finished. We won't name George, but there are others. And it's when things begin so well and just... I'm not going to go off on one, just leaving it there. Finish what you start and finish it well. Next one, when you hear dialogue that is essentially, as you know, ... No, that is lazy exposition. I recently read a Dark Angels 40k book where a character actually said, of course in our culture that is not allowed. You're both in that culture, you both knew this, as fact. Why are you stating it aloud? You're stating it to state it to the reader. It annoyed me, similar but different, in The Once and Future King, where Merlin is just talking to the reader. He's talking about communism and nationalism. And he's allegedly talking to Arthur, but Arthur states clearly, I do not understand what this is, and states later, I did not understand what that was. I have never understood it. So Merlin isn't talking to Arthur. Merlin knows Arthur's not taking this in. He's talking to us. He's talking to the reader. It's the author directly sharing his political opinions. No. Have some subtlety. If you want to share your thoughts, your social or political views in a book, do it as part of the story. Make it natural. Don't just have a character say, well, here's what communism and nationalism are. No. It's rubbish. The same thing with lazy exposition. And the last thing I have noted, and I'm watching the timer on this thing tick on, so I'll keep this brief, love triangles. Or rather, love triangles which are not triangular. The love triangle that's good, not necessarily the original, but the big one, is Lancelot, Arthur, Guinevere. The reason it works is because Lancelot and Arthur love one another as much as they love Guinevere, and that's what makes it tragedy. It's not just two blokes love the same woman, and the relationship between the two men is a secondary consideration. Everybody loves one another. It is a triangle. And there is the tragedy, is it cannot be equal. It is not an equilateral triangle. Or is it? Is it shifting? Is it isosceles? Is it a right angle? Who knows? But that's what a love triangle is. Too often you see what I think of as the love arrowhead, where you have the person here. In modern films it tends to be the teenage girl here and the beautiful teenage or early 20s or 100-year-old vampire here and the other bloke here. And they're both obsessively in love with her, and between them you generally have grudging respect. You rarely have genuine friendship. Normally, the classic is they'll start off as antagonists because they both love the girl, and then there will be the grudging respect of, you're all right, LaRusso, good match, that kind of thing. But there isn't a real relationship, so it isn't a triangle. It's just a love rivalry. And that's boring. And not only is it's mostly boring. It can be given a little something. But it's so overused. It is so hammered home in so many books, and it's so frequently so badly done that it's lost all power and is just silly. The emotional gut reaction comes from, isn't it terrible? Everyone here is making everyone else miserable. It's not just this, it's this. That is what a love triangle should be. And it's rare. So you can tell I've been off on one, I need another sip. Well, that was the last question on this thing, and this thing is ticking over. So I am going to stop this madness before it can go any further. That was the Booktube tag, I'm so annoyed at Booktube. And I'm just annoyed at the world. So I will leave you there with all the things, in Booktube at least, with which I am annoyed. This is James, aka JP Harker. Well,